Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this new day, for those of us who it's morning, and we're thankful for the things that you've been teaching us. We ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can be here. And as we review some understandings of the past on how we've arrived at July 18th and other dates, we pray, Lord, that it can give us guidance in how we evaluate new information and new light. Thank you for each person, and we ask for your Holy Spirit to be poured out. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So the study today is a bit of a review of how our structures have given us dates and how these structures go back into the past. And I'm not going to be able to cover everything because I've spent a lot of time in other presentations, but I want to highlight a few things. And one is we had a study on Sunday where we addressed some structures and some dates. It was a little bit confusing in that there was a lot of information there, probably should have been presented over a longer period of time. But we could see that the basic structures, what we saw anyway, what I saw, was that this affirmed the structure we already had, and that the dates that were in the future weren't necessarily events that we could then say this is going to be this way mark or that way mark. Because the 777 that we have, July 18th, November 9th, the Levitical chiasm, all these different chiasms, are based upon prophecies in the past that have established these waymarks in the present. And I want to illustrate that. Now I spent the last, 4 hours or so writing a paper, which I'm going to email to everyone. I'm not done yet. And that I'm going to go through, or at least refer to in tomorrow morning's study. And that I'm going to look at 3 different proposals that people have put forward regarding dates that we could set that are still in the future, and show why we can't do that in the way that they're trying to propose it. But I'm going to give them really a fair evaluation and use this as an illustration of what I'm showing you today. I'm going to contrast the two on how we arrived at the dates that we have. And part of the problem is that people don't fully understand, even within this movement, how we arrived at these dates. That is, because we've done so much analysis of the dates, they often get confused with the analysis that we're using with how we arrived at the dates themselves. What I'm going to specifically look at today is the first part of the Levitical chiasm, or the midnight chiasm, pardon me, the one that we used to come to November 9th, 2019, at least the one that I used to confirm that. I'm not going to look at how Tess arrived at November 9th, because I didn't actually believe that her methodology was sound, that the way she arrived at November 9th, 2019, I believe was based upon faulty arguments. And Stephen arrived at November 9th as well, using a much more sound principle than what she had used. And then I had confirmed it based upon this structure that had to do with a structure that was parallel to Samuel Snow's letters that we didn't find out about until after. So I'm just going to quickly review this. So what we had was this date, November 9th. This date then was proposed as the close of probation for the priests. At least that's one of the things that it was proposed as. And this, of course, was in the line of the priests. Now, when this was proposed, this was October 3rd, 2018. was a Wednesday. And there were two presentations. One was called 10 Years, and the other one was called The Midnight Cry. And these two presentations, this was where we first heard about November 9th. And the suggestion was, even though it wasn't really stated, is that this is going to be raffia, the close of probation for the priests. Raffia would be midnight on the line of the Levites. Now, what happened was 10 days later, October 13th, we were told that by Daniel from Brazil, that he had found out on July 27th, 2018, that this was 126 days from the Italian camp meeting. And he had proposed that this Sabbath here, now he was counting from June 10th, counting ordinally, so he started at 1. But it was on June 9th at 9:11 that Elder Jeff closed the Sabbath, and that's where I'm choosing to count it from now. But we could use June 10th and just do an ordinal count. But on July 27th, he had made a note that this was 126 days, and he used Revelation, where it talks about, in Revelation 10, with 1 foot on the sea, 1 foot on the land. He looked at this as the sea, and this was the land, and that the midnight cry would be given for the priests on this date, on October 13th. Now, he told us this for the first time at the prayer meeting that happened on Wednesday night. And we weren't actually discussing November 9th so much as the issue was really around accepting what Tess was saying regarding the two streams of information, whether we should listen to CNN over Fox. So Parminder and Jeff were meeting together. Prior to the prayer meeting, people started coming in, listening to their conversation, and we ended up not really having a prayer meeting. We just continued on in this discussion. But it was during this time, Wednesday evening, that Daniel told us about this 126 days. So what he was disappointed, one is the November 9th date was already given, but also he thought maybe Parminder or Tess would be presenting on this Sabbath, but he ended up being the one that was going to present, which to him was a disappointment that he had to present on that day. Now, on that day at noon, I was there sitting, listening to that presentation, and I counted 391.5 days from noon to midnight commencing November 9th. Now, this to me was significant. So I was thinking about what he had presented, this 126 days, and then I counted 391.5, and I noticed that this structure reminded me of the structure of the chronology of the kings of Judah, where you have, I guess I could do it this way, you have 120 years of Saul, David, and Solomon, and then 391 years and a half of the kings of Judah. So this is Judah by itself. So this goes from 977 to 586, and this is 1097. So I was looking at this. Now I noticed this is 126 and this is 120, but I thought about, maybe going back to June 15th. And on the rabbinical calendar, this was the second day of the fourth month, which was the last date of Samuel Snow's letters. Samuel Snow's last letter, his July 18th letter. And so then I saw, well, this was 120 days. And so I sort of focused more on the 120 days and the 391.5, but Daniel had given us this 126 days. Now, that's how we arrived at confirming November 9th. Now, of course, we arrived at it in different ways. But the question was, how can we predict dates in the future? The question is, how can we know? Now, what happened here was, to me, a principle that was set up that is, after we're passing the ground, or we're on the ground of fulfilled prophecy, those events will shine light back upon the past, and those events of the past will shine light on the future. Now, of course, this is not really the past here. I mean, you could say October 13th at noon, I'm looking back at this structure. But no, the past was what I just showed you. The past was Ezekiel. So I saw first here Ezekiel, and this would be the 391.5, but from that is the 390 and the 40, and also all the symbolism of Ezekiel, because Ezekiel, he begins on the 5th day of the 4th month, and we know that Ezekiel parallels snow. So what this did is it brought me back to look at Ezekiel, but also at Millerite history. And you can see here, even in the 2nd day of the 4th month, I'm using a symbol from Millerite history, the July 18th letter of Snow's, his last letter, which is part of a structural chiasm. Now that structural chiasm, I'm going to draw below here. So it starts on February 16th. This is in 1844. His letter's published February 22nd, and it's republished on April 3rd. And then it's going to be, let me move this over here, April 3rd, I'll put this here. And then it's then we have, of course, April 19th, which is the 1st day of the 1st month. And then his letter is going to, his 2nd letter is going to be published on May 2nd. And then his 3rd letter is going to be published on June 22nd. So it suggests Ezekiel, and it suggests snow. Now, what ended up happening, so I'm going to kind of skip a bit, but I just want to show this structure, is that I then dealt with this 390 and 40 days, which I'm not going to go through, and I found that in Ezekiel, this 390 and these 40 days, the 390 began on the 5th day of the 4th month, but the 40 days began on August 15th. So this brought together the symbols of midnight and the midnight cry. And of course, there's lots of other symbolism that comes from Ezekiel, goes back to 977, which it gives us this date of the 15th day of the 8th month. And so we had all these things, all this structure, all this symbolism that reached way back into Ezekiel, but also connected us to the history of Samuel Snow. Now, when I had arrived at the date, July 18th, 2020, a little bit after this, 2020, this date here was a Julian date. And the reason why I had this date is I had taken this 390 and this 40, I'd taken the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 4 and the prediction about the destruction of Jerusalem, and then I had gone to the year 2020 and found that the 10th day of the 5th month was July 18th Julian. So I've done this other places, and if you're not familiar with this, anybody watching this, you could go back and watch those presentations. But the point was, we're then going to predict a date past November 9th. And that date was going to be July 18th, 2020. And this wasn't accepted. Well, it initially was by Jeff and lots of other people. But there was this argument that we can't make any predictions past November 9th. It wasn't a very good argument, but it was an argument, and it was a way of trying to discount this date. Now, one of the arguments is that we weren't doing this line upon line, and we weren't following the correct methodology. Of course, that was nonsense. We were just doing what we had always done in establishing prophecy, using numbers in the same way that we had always used them. It's just that we saw more. And already we had established the connection between snow and Ezekiel, and between the prophecy of Josiah and the prophecy of Josiah Litch, which is, of course, the next step. But so when I had this date here, I went to the board and I drew this date, and then I counted 391.5 days back from July 18th, and I came to June 22nd. And then what we realized, and I'm just going to remove this date here, we realized that this 126 days was divided. August 11th is the center of this. And we could then look at this whole structure, and we could see that this was also a chiasm in Samuel Snow's letters that we hadn't noticed. Now, before, we had a chiasm from February 6th to May 2nd, and then from May 2nd to July 18th in 1844. But now when we put this 391.5 here, and we went to June 22nd, we could see that the center of this chiasm was April 19th, and it aligned with the center of this chiasm, August 11th. And then we could also take 13 days and go August 11th, Julian, to see that this aligned with May 2nd, which is 13 days past April 19th. And then we could again line July 27th with April 3rd, this June 15th with February 22nd. And we could see that we had a chiasm, though there's a mixture of ordinal and cardinal in here. So I'm not going to deal with the exact details. But the chances that we could just do this and go back to snow. So think about it. We started here with this structure, which suggested Ezekiel. We went back to Ezekiel. We came to this date, and we knew that snow and Ezekiel are connected. But then we looked at this structure, and we saw that this was the structure of Samuel Snow's letters. So this is the structure of Samuel Snow's letters. So this was not some simple counting 252 days past November 9th to come at July 18th, 2020. And now this, of course, is July 18th, 2020 Gregorian. We know that we have the Julian one, which is the one that I first came to, which was July 13th. July 31st, yes, July 31st. 13 days past there. So this is the Julian date. This is the 10th day of the 5th month. And this one's the 26th day of the 4th month. So we had Revelation 9, and we're all familiar with that. So Revelation 9 then gave us another witness for this history. And of course, Revelation 9 symbolism then was suggested in here, because we had the July 27th date and we had the August 11th date. So this became like wheels within wheels of connectedness. But somebody looking at this would think that what we merely did was we counted 252 days to come to July 18th. That is, that's what many people think. They don't even know that there's all this structure. They don't know that if we take Samuel Snow's letters and just add a year between June 22nd and July 18th, his third and his publishing of his fourth letter, that we end up with this structure that parallels this. So what they had to do is they had to reject the structure completely. They had to say it was nonsense. So even the people who were involved in this rejected this structure. Now, Tess rejected this. She rejected November 9th as being connected to this structure at all. Now, this October 13th date, which she had provided from the miracle of Fatima, noon, should have been evidence to her that this has to be correct. And also the fact that we could take her birth on November 9th, 1990, and connect it back to October 13th, 1989, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was born, her hero, and show that they're connected by 391.5. And AOC is born at noon in New York on October 13th. So to me, there was a lot of coincidences that we could then analyze this after the fact. But the reality is that we didn't derive these dates just using analysis. These dates were derived using prophecy. And, this is, this to me is an important point when we start to look at dates, because that's what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to look at some other dates that people have proposed. Now, we could then look at, so I'm going to erase this here. So hopefully people get that, that this is not just some throwing numbers up in the air and finding out where they land sort of argument. That's not how we did it. Now, we could look at some of our other dates that we have. Let's look at the 777 itself. So when we go here and we have November 9th, 2019, and July 18th, 2020, and we have this 777 days. Now, somebody could argue that what we did was we used some analysis, in a sense, to arrive at this December 25th date, 2021. That is, we already had this 252 days, and we know that Stephen had found this. But then we have this other date over here, and we know that this is 525 days. And of course, 777, where does it come from? Some people may not really fully understand this, but it comes from actually quite a few different places. But the basic place we would go November 9th, 1989 to December 25th, 1991, and we have 777 ordinal days here. That is 30 years prior to here. And so that we know this is about the priests. And so if we can connect November 9th here with 30 years, we should be able to connect December 25th with 30 years. Now, somebody may say, well, that's again just taking this history and placing it over there and having no second witnesses. But yet when we look at this history, what we had decided, initially we had this as the time of the end. But we now came to recognize that this whole period was the time of the end, in that it paralleled what happened in with Cyrus and, or pardon me, this way, Darius the Mede and Cyrus. And this would be 539 and 537, that history. So we had already established that in the history, in the parallel that we're placing here, that these two here are together and they're 2 years apart. And so we know that this history here, this 777, is valid. And there's no way that you could just take November 9th and not take December 25th, especially in light of the fact that we have July 18th. And July 18th gives us this structure here, but it also gives us this structure. And each of these unfoldings of light, the main thing to understand about every time we did this, we arrived at new dates, if you want to look at it this way. They were part of a structure. It was an unfolding of light. And Ellen White talks about new light, and she says new light always makes the old light shine brighter. It doesn't undo or take away from old light. It doesn't reject it. And that's an important part that we need to accept, is that when we're looking at new light, there's light that God has established, and it's going to make that shine brighter. It's going to give us insight into past light. So this definitely does. Now, it also ended up connecting all this stuff here, connected with a whole history within this movement, going back even as far as 2011, June 22nd, 2011, and we could even go back further in this history, so that we see that there's this structure here. So there isn't just one witness or two witnesses, there's multiple witnesses. And these witnesses, as we start to interlock them, we know we have the Levitical chiasm. And this Levitical chiasm has the March 27th dates in it. And then we also had the midnight chiasm. So one of the things about this is this actually created another chiasm that tied with the beginning of that chiasm that we used to confirm November 9th. So we had September 7th and we had January 11th. So we had a whole bunch of structure that affirmed that. And we saw events unfold and occur that affirmed that those structures were sound. Now, they were internal fulfillments of prophecy, but nonetheless, you could see that that was sound. And then you have the midnight chiasm. And of course, this midnight chiasm focused upon, as I said, November 9th and October 13th and all these other dates, but it actually confirmed the March 27th chiasm, because the center of this one was March 27th, 2019, which was the start of the chiasm. This is March 27th, 2021, which is the end. But the center of the Levitical chiasm is March 27th, 2020. And of course, we could then tie March 27th, 2020 with other structures. So we continue to have these structures that were interlocked with each other in ways that was mathematically very unlikely. Now, I've expanded this to what I call the 777 chiasm. So this is your basic structure. And the 777 chiasm has two elements. It has this chiasm that reaches back here. So you could call this a 777 chiasm. But I also have one that goes from December 21st, 2012 to December 25th, 2021. And so to have that sort of structural chiasm, which has another chiasm connected to it, which I'll call it here the priestly chiasm. Now this is the one that actually deals with June 22nd. So we have this June 22nd date, which relates to FFA and to the priests, to this movement. And I'm not sure necessarily what to do with all that. As time goes on, I think we'll understand this better. But the point is, we have all these structures and they're all interlocked with each other. So when it comes to evaluating new dates, those new dates would have to meet that criteria. That is, and I've been open to what people have to say. So people have sent me all kinds of different analysis of dates. They'll count back 273 days from some date we have, or they'll count 252 days back, or they'll count 1,260 days forward or backwards. Different ways in which people are trying to propose new dates. And they might even find a coincidence that occurs when they do that. Now, sometimes people have made these proposals based upon dreams. So they dreamed some date, or they just feel that they're somehow inspired in some way. Now, the other thing that we've seen, and all of us have seen this, is that people will take events that happen in their personal life. Let's say they saw, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but they'll see some series of numbers. Maybe they, go to some place and the address is 252 or 126. And they give some significance to this as if it's confirming what we know. Now, it's not, unless it's done and it occurs in a very specific way. So for instance, if you're praying about something and you're in severe stress and doubt, and you don't know what to do, and you ask God for a sign, maybe even if you don't ask for a sign, but you're just struggling with something, and then you look up and you see a birdhouse with 187 on it, at that trying time, then I would say, well, that would be an affirmation. For you personally, it's not something that you could give as an evidence to someone else. I mean, you could tell somebody about it, but that would be a personal affirmation. You couldn't from that then extrapolate a new date. So let's say we didn't have the date 187 and somebody was going along, or maybe they say they were under stress and they wanted to know, is 187 true or not? And they look up and they see a birdhouse and it says on it, some other date. And then they look across and they see 2021 on something else and they say, oh, well, God told me that July 18th is wrong, but I have this other date, August 15th, and it's 2021, and you were all wrong about that. So you would see there would be a number of problems. One is the person has this new date, but they've also rejected old light that was established. Now, of course, when it comes to these types of issues, often people are claiming that they're establishing or they're confirming something that we already have. And so, as I said, I'm very open to listen to what people have to say, because light can come from unexpected places. But often people are just so focused upon these coincidences, and they don't understand how we arrived at the dates we have. And that's why they can use these methods to propose new dates. And I would say that I've had people propose to me all kinds of dates. Like I haven't even kept track of it. And this even started back in 2018. People would write me and they would say, from this date here, it's 1,260 days. So we should expect this event to happen, in 2019 or 2020. Now, I also ended up arriving at some other dates, doing an analysis of the whole structure from 977 BC all the way up to November 22nd, 2018. Now, this was a study that I did in November of 2018. Now, it wasn't fully accepted. That is, there was seen some validity in what I was doing. There was some connections, but it wasn't really accepted the way that I interpreted the prophecy or how I even saw that it was fulfilled. So there was this disagreement, which, never really had a chance to resolve. But I think that prophecy still stands in the way that I understood it initially. And that's just my view. So I could be wrong, but to me, it seems to have been fulfilled in the way that I said. Now, in saying that, there is this, and I bring that up. Now, I know not everybody's familiar with it, so I'm going to try to just deal with it in as brief a way as possible. That somebody could take that and say that I was just doing what other people were doing. That is false. But I established this, and there is a study on this, the Thanksgiving prediction, it would be called. But I established that in 977 BC, that this is November 22nd, and it's the 15th day of the 8th month in 977 BC, and this is Jeroboam offering upon the altar, and we know that he typifies the United States, right? This is at the beginning of northern Israel, and northern Israel is going to typify the United States, and it's going to have 235 years that are going to bring us to 742 BC, and then we're going to have 235 months that are going to bring us to 723 BC. And this is a revolution, and this is a civil war. And I still believe that that idea of the revolution and civil wars and their connections in each of these histories of these nations are valid. And we know that this civil war here, 19 years later, that this marks the captivity of Hoshea and the beginning of the 2520, that's then going to end here in 1798. And this is the history of the beginning of the United States, which is going to be connected to a revolution and then a civil war. And I connected all. What's that?
You're saying 723 is a civil war.
This is a civil war here. This is the end. This is the end. This history here deals with a civil war. And then this is the end of northern Israel. This marks the end of it. So 723 is not the civil war itself. This is the history of the civil war. And this is going to connect this history here with this history here, because you're going to have the civil war starting here in the 1776, we'll just say, but it's really before that, right? So you have this history of the.
It's not a civil war. This would be a revolution.
Between the United States and Britain. The United States is part of the British Empire. So it's a civil war, right, in that sense.
I would say it'd be more of a revolution.
Yeah, it's a revolution. Same thing. It's just another name for the same thing. Is this a civil war or a revolution? Right, 977. It just depends on how you look at it, right? This is a civil war. This is a civil war, or this is a revolution. This is a revolution that's creating this new kingdom, and yet these two kingdoms here, we call it a civil war, even though they're two separate kingdoms. Now, so there are some differences. I agree with you there, but my point is that this history here that marks the end of northern Israel is going to mark the beginning of the United States that's going to parallel it. So this is going to be this two-horn power that formed here. And then we're going to have this revolution, if you want to use that term. This can go back and parallel this. It also parallels this. This whole history is a history of two nations that divide, and we have this civil war, and then we have this 2520. So we've already established that these two dates tie northern Israel, the false prophet, with the United States, which is also the false prophet. Can you agree with that explanation, Stephen?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to just go through it quickly and not be very, very precise about it. My point was that in this history, we had all these Thanksgivings that are going to arise. And that would parallel us back to this history, right? Because this is where we have the counterfeit day of worship. And so we're going to have this counterfeit feast day, Thanksgiving. And this is going to be established in 1863, that it's the fourth Thursday of November. And this is going to continue. And I'm not going to deal with all the different structural things, but it pointed us to November 22nd, 2018, that Thanksgiving, where we said that what happened here at the beginning, where Jeroboam's hand was restrained and then loosed, that this would happen here. Now that wasn't accepted. We had another interpretation that it had to do with the turkey that was released, that it was restrained and then loosed. But that to me, didn't really seem to fit what this whole structure was talking about. So there's definitely differences in how this would be interpreted. My point was, though, when I had this date, November 26, 2018, it was built upon a whole line that reached way back to here, and that was established by numerous different witnesses within the structure, but also the symbolism that was consistent with these civil wars and revolutions, and also the false feast day. And the reason why that prediction was given, I believed at the time, was to see whether I could predict an event in the future, which wasn't far in the future, but I could understand I didn't know what it would be, but I could understand the symbolism attached to it. And to me, that seemed to affirm that I could. Now, as far as being a new date, this wasn't a date upon the line. That is, I wasn't creating a new waymark. I wasn't saying that this had something to do with this waymark. And that was one of the criticisms of it, that it wasn't line upon line. But of course, if we looked at what the purposes were of this was simply to tie back to the past and to understand if this structure was valid, which I still believe it is. Whether somebody agrees with my interpretation at the end or not, it was agreed that the structure was valid. And so this is the thing that we're going to look at tomorrow when we look at these other dates that have been proposed. And it's not so much that they proposed these dates and said, we know in some cases what's going to happen. And in some cases, I would say that, we haven't even, that hasn't ever even been suggested. But what people will do is they will take parts of structures and attach them to structures we already have. And parts of those structures are valid, right? And then the confirmation that they see in those structures, even though they think it means that it points forward, are really just a result of the structure that already exists. And we can see this a little bit with what Dan presented on Sunday, is that we had this structure, and if you started to move it over, if you move that structure over, it will still consistently witness to the existing structure. But it doesn't mean that the dates that it puts into the future are to be looked upon as events. All it's telling us is that the structure is sound. It's an analysis of the structure. And we can do this with structures. We can see that parts of structures, if we move them around, are going to still fit into the rest of the structure. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. But let's say I had a pattern of lines. So I had two rulers, let's say, and they had some pattern of lines on them. And let's say this pattern has some repeating pattern in it. And then I take these two rulers, right? And then I decide to slide the one over, and I might find that the pattern of lines will match up on this part of the ruler with this part of the ruler. But it doesn't mean then that this pattern of lines in the future has any meaning. It's maybe not the best example, but a pattern of dates that fits into a pattern. And if I just move these dates and line them up, I could say, well, these line up, but that's going to naturally occur because these already have a pattern. And so, you have to be careful about that. And then I would need to have other witnesses. Now in Dan's, he has other witnesses, 144 weeks, for instance, that shows that there's some connection. Plus there's symbolism in the date that he has. There's some other connections as well. But what this can show is just that the structure is correct on this part, but it doesn't mean that you can then go past here and then say August 13th, 2022 is the Sunday law or anything like that. and this is what people will often do, is they'll take part of a structure, they'll count some days this way or some days back, they'll find that there's some connection, but then that date that they have projected into the future, they will say, well, it must be this. And now, of course, we have the objective idea of the dates, but we have the subjective idea of what it means. Even for me, when I look at November 22nd, I mean, I can affirm the structure 100%, and I can suggest that I was right about the event. But there's still a subjectivity there. Somebody looking at the same event can say, well, I see the structure, but I don't understand your interpretation. I think it's wrong. And they can have their reasons why they think it's wrong. But that's subjective. And we know that we're subjective creatures. So the question is, that we need to ask ourselves, what is subjective and what is objective? And just because I have a structure, even that's objective, I have to be very careful about the subjective natures of analyzing that. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to look at these other three. Now, part of the reason we're doing that is because Chuck is going to be presenting on Thursday. And there he is, Chuck. Hi, Chuck. And we're going to evaluate what he has to say. Now, what Chuck has to say, Stephen said he's looked at the paper. He has the same problem I do, is I don't understand everything that Chuck is saying. And so Chuck's going to have his opportunity on Thursday to explain it better. Now, there's some valid things, observations that Chuck has. One is Chuck uses the Bible, but he thinks in metaphor and he talks in metaphor. And we often don't know what he's saying, but it doesn't mean that he's wrong. Just because I don't understand something doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that maybe I'm a little slow in that area. I'm not great with metaphor. And some people are. Some people just get metaphors right away. I don't, for some reason. But we're going to look at that. But before we look at that, we're going to look at his brother Robert's, two of his dates that he's proposed. One that's definitely very shaky. The other one that's not. It has some validity to it. But we're going to look at that. And then we're going to also look again at Dan's date and try to contrast that with what we've just done and try to see how we can do these things, how we can look at dates in the future and look at events. And can we predict events? Can we just say, because we found this date in the future, that it's this event or that event? And how subjective are we being when we're doing that? And I have to even say this about the July 18th prediction when it was first made. All I had was the 26th day of the fourth month and the 10th day of the fifth month. And I understood those symbols. One was Islam that came from Josiah Litch's prophecy. The other one was a symbol for the destruction of Jerusalem. And of course, I had the story attached to the 10th day of the fifth month from Ezekiel and Ezekiel 20, which I used to derive the year 2020. So I had that story there that this is dealing with Jerusalem, which would be the church. So I interpreted that symbol. And then I interpreted it as an attack on the United States by Islam that's going to happen 13 days before the 10th day of the fifth month, which is the destruction of Adventism. So that was my initial interpretation. But that was not me saying, I know what's going to happen. But what ended up occurring was Hiroshima, Chernobyl, all the structures connected with that, all the symbolism connected with that, Acts 27, the connection of the Parthenon and Nashville with Ellen White's vision. And so we had all this evidence piled upon top of that initial prediction that really seemed to affirm, and I still think affirms, that this is an attack on the United States by Islam on July 18th at the Nashville Parthenon. And to me, that's sound reasoning. Now, the other thing is, when I made my initial prediction, I was willing to set it aside, which sometimes people aren't willing to do. That is, they have some light and they think people have to accept it. And when people don't accept it, they're quite disappointed. But the reality was, and the reality is, if it's truth and it's necessary, it's God who's responsible for it, not the person who finds it. And so my view was, if July 18, 2020 was true, then, and necessary, and something that needs to be a message proclaimed by this movement, that God would take care of it. I had no intention of me taking that role of God. And of course, events unfolded in such a way that July 18, 2020 became our message, which was not by any action of mine. It was definitely other people, it was actions outside of my control that occurred, that happened. And I think that's another important point for anybody proposing a date, is that you have to leave it in God's hands. If it's true, God will make it understood. And we have to leave that responsibility with God. So any questions or comments on this?
I appreciate the background.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think it's helpful to go over some of these things again and again. I know the criticism, Tabo met with Colin, the guy who leads out in our Bible study a week ago. And, Tabo, the way that he said that we made these predictions is Theodore throws these numbers up in the air and see where they land. So, the people in the new movement, whether some of them understand it or not, I think most, they have no idea how we arrived at July 18th. And where for me, looking at it, I could see years of study that led to this conclusion, and that built upon each other. So, and I know that I've tried to do that in all these presentations to show that history. But sometimes there's little details, or going over it in just simple ways. It really does help us to understand this. Any other thoughts?
This has been a good review.
Okay. Do you got any thoughts, though? I mean, it's nice to say it's a good review, but just comments to add to what I've said.
I'll have a comment.
Okay.
The judgments that are coming upon the United States that show up on the line, 718, and by the way, on page 3, I've got a date in there.
Yeah.
Where it starts with Isaiah 4:5. That date should be 12/25/2021. I've got revision 3 coming out.
Okay.
This thing's getting longer.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. And you're going to have an hour, Chuck, remember.
Yeah.
So, send us your papers as soon as you got your revision. We'll send it to everyone. But, we're not going to necessarily, what we want to be able to get from you on Thursday is to be able to understand what you're talking about. That's the first thing, is you have to be able to make us to understand that. Before we can evaluate what you're saying, we need to understand what it is. And that's the problem that I've had, is still, even talking to you on the phone, is I don't fully understand what it is you're talking about. Now, there are some dates and stuff. Your brother proposed some dates, and you have some connected with that as well. But this is why we're doing this. We want to be able to ourselves evaluate how we receive new light. And the wrong way is to just say, I don't understand it, or I don't agree with it, and then just dismiss it. Because if God's giving us light and we treat light in that way, because that's what happened to me. So I'm just looking at what happened to me. People, the arguments that they had for dismissing July 18th were very weak arguments, because they didn't understand it. And of course, they never made the effort to. But we don't want to do that with you and your brother's studies, or with anybody's studies, right? It's not just.
I'm bringing a few things to this potluck dinner we got. Nobody's got to eat this stuff.
Right. Yeah, we can make choices about what we're going to choose at a potluck. I agree.
But what goes on to the, on to the congregation is a different thing.
Right. And you understand and you appreciate where I'm coming from. Like we're not accepting what you're saying yet, but we're not rejecting it, because we don't know what it is. But we're going to give you that opportunity, as a Christian brother, to present that. And I still think there are some things in what you're presenting. There's some parts of it that I still think are valid. So without Chuck commenting, any other comments regarding or input into this, because some people may say, well, this isn't really the right thing to do. We shouldn't be opening up the floor for things that we're not certain about. There's been this criticism regarding doing this. Does anybody have thoughts on that idea? If no one has thoughts, my thought on that idea is simply Samuel Snow's first letter. The fact that it was published on April 3rd, 1844, in the Signs, with the disclaimer, we don't agree with his conclusions, but there's some interesting information. I think we have a precedent within the Millerite movement that we can look at things that haven't been established, that are not certain, for examination. And you see it all through the Millerite period. They're willing to look at things that on the surface can appear speculative. Now imagine if the Millerite movement had shut down Samuel Snow, never let him speak at a camp meeting, and never let him publish his letters. If you consider that perspective, you can see that, and they would have shut down, of course, all kinds of light and error, but they never would have received that light. And so I think it's important in the time that we're in before July 18th to look at things, and it's not about like looking at fanatical ideas that we know are wrong. We're looking at things that are fitting into what we have, and we have to decide whether they fit or whether they're just, speculations that don't really fit. And so we need to know that. So anyway, that's my final comment. And we can close with prayer. So that's what we're going to do, if nobody else has a comment. And then we can end the recording here. So let's kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time we had this morning or evening to study together. We ask for your care for each person. We know that there's many struggles that we face as we approach July 18th, and many more we will face afterwards. And we just ask that you can help us to focus our thoughts and attention upon the little tasks that you give us each day, to not be obsessed with big things, but to take care of the little things. Help us in our day-to-day walk with you. Help us in our ministry to others. And thank you, Lord, for hearing our prayer. And be with those that we're studying with and sharing with. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.